Thanks everyone for tuning in to check out our podcast today, Maker Connect. My name is Matt Despins and I'll be your host for the show. With me today, we have Jim Barker. Jim is currently Chief Revenue Officer at Live Earth and no doubt has some very interesting stories and perspectives to share. Jim, if you're open to it, I'd love to start by asking you to tell us just a little bit about your career and your background so the listeners can get just a flavor of your negotiation experience and also when you realized how important negotiations were. So we're super excited to have you here, sir. And with that, take it away. I'd love to hear a little bit about you.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me. Man, there's a lot to unpack in just that question. So,
yes, sir.
I'll start with where
by design. By design, Jim.
No kidding. I'll start with where I realized negotiation was important, and that was
okay.
I come from a small town, a family of entrepreneurs. So my brother and sister are both have multiple businesses and have done well for themselves. When I went to college, I paid my way through college having my own lawn service. And I started that by going door to door, knocking on doors and asking people if I could take care of their lawns. And so naturally in that mode, people would say, no, I've got it taken care of, and I won't age myself, but they would say, we got someone who comes by once a week. We spend $30, $35 a week or whatever. And so that taught me the importance of negotiation through that process because I had to figure out how do you create value in those circumstances. Just so happened I went on through college. I got a business degree, got into the work world, went right into sales because I kind of knew that's the direction I wanted to go. And I guess you could say almost 30 years later, I'm still here. And it just happened in that capacity, go through the channels of really most of my background has been in technology related sales or marketing. Like I've led marketing teams for organizations and things like that too. So that's my background, mostly technology sales, marketing, and where I learned negotiation was important is early on in life. So that helped me quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, going around, I by the way, I did the exact same thing. I remember those days pushing that lawnmower around, walking up and, back when it was safe to do that. Early on though, talking about overcoming objections and even that transaction has a piece of negotiations to it, right? I mean, they're going to want their lawn mowed in a certain way, a certain number of times per week, and you're going to want a certain price of that. Do you recall, it's okay if you don't, but do you recall actually having some negotiations in those interactions?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because when I first started, at first I went out and spent my own money. I think I spent $1,200. I bought a used riding mower, bought a trailer, a used riding mower, a lawnmower, a weed eater, edger, all the stuff that you get set up. And when I started knocking on doors, it was because I had this loan I needed to pay back. So, at some point you look desperate. So there's this element of, just looking desperate. It's like, oh, and so you do all the crazy things you aren't supposed to do. Like I would point out what competitors hadn't done, like, oh, they're missing their edging, all this kind of stuff. And so, but yeah, I remember some of those very, very vaguely. Some of them turned out to be wonderful, wonderful clients, and others did everything but slam the door in my face. So I got good experiences there as well.
Yeah, for me, it was not only the lawns, but I also remember about a year and a half where I actually sold I went around selling newspaper subscriptions. And I remember having a paper route and people would leave the money in a little envelope that I would collect each week when I would go back and get the papers. I still have memories of that. So funny stuff. You're bringing me back, sir. You're bringing me back.
There we go.
Yeah. So, you just brought up a point that's pretty interesting, which is, you said that you had gone out and you had purchased all the equipment, the used riding mower, trail, whatnot, what I think $1,200 or $1,300 is what you said you were into it for. And so you then were coming into that business, not only from a sales perspective, but negotiations. You were negotiating, there was some emotion tied there, right? Because you had a loan or some way you had to recoup, even if it was to yourself, you had to pay back that $1,200, call it. So I want to talk a minute about fear and emotions in negotiations. Aside from some of these personal, call it ambitions, like, geez, I got to pay back the money, what have you seen in the world of negotiations in terms of fear? Where do you think people's fear generates from, whether it's looking ridiculous or failing or whatnot? What do you generally think about fear in negotiations?
Yeah, it's a great question. I believe it really comes from childhood. We come up, if you think about it, we come up through childhood, normally taught, and I'm aging myself, but taught that
It's
you don't
okay.
talk about money at the dinner table.
Yep.
So because of that, there's this element of, ooh, don't bring it up. Mom or dad's going to get upset if you bring up money at the dinner table. And I think it transcends right on into adult life. Now we get to this place where we're starting to work with other people on an exchange of value. And in sales, that exchange of value in their case is money. So there's an investment on their part. In our case, it's some type of product or service. And what we tend to want to think about is the thing we're most comfortable with, which is bragging about our product or our service, but not getting to. I think about what was Zig Ziglar's book, The Secrets of Closing the Sale, or whatever, where
Mm-hmm.
he talks about you know runs left on base. We think about baseball, use the baseball analogy, and he says, hey, you can get on base all day long, but if you don't ever make it home, it doesn't matter. You can be the team that left the most runs on base, and you don't win the World Series. So at some point, you got to get on base, and that getting to that point of getting comfortable talking about that the money element is where I think a lot of our fear comes in. It's where at least I feel like even with me in those scenarios, I think about talking to these largely at that point the people I was talking to, my primary audience was female, and doing
Mm-hmm.
everything I could to brag about all the hard work I was going to do and all the things we were going to do and all that. But the minute it came to money, I just clammed up. So that fear from within kind of, I feel like, came from the dinner table conversations of growing up as a kid is, oh, you don't talk about that. But you've got to. She's got to understand, like, what's it gonna take to get these things that you're talking about, and that's where the money element comes in.
That's actually a really interesting perspective. I've asked that question a few different times in the podcast, and that's, I haven't heard that answer before, and that's actually that's true. I mean, we are preconditioned pretty early that money is such a sensitive topic that when you get to it, or you're even asking somebody for something, right? I mean, in my generation as well, I mean, we're taught you just don't ask, be self sufficient, right? And so when you get to that point, we got to ask for something, and it happens to be money. This shows some vulnerability there, and that can be a little bit uncomfortable. That's a really good point. And so,
Yeah.
what kind of work have you done to be able to overcome that? Is it just by immersion? You're just doing it so many times. I mean, how do you think you overcame that?
So you bring up another great point, Matt. It's like the whole self sufficient. That's kind of the other component of it. Is like we're taught to go out and survive and understand how to go survive as individuals. And in order for us to survive, we know that there's an element of a resource that we need to survive, and that element's called money. And so it's just another great example. There's probably, to your question, there's probably a couple of things that come to mind. Once is, when you're as old as I am, you've done it enough times that you sit in front of and sit in front of someone else and worked on negotiating. So you've got, I remember the bad times much more than the good because they hurt so bad. So it's kind of
Yep.
like, of course I can remember all of, a handful of my big wins, but golly, we could probably talk for hours on the losses and just the mistakes that were made. And so there's an element of it that takes, it's that doing it that's important. There's another element that training becomes important. It's where you guys come in. I mean, there's got to be an element of, and I was blessed with having mentors and people around me growing, through my growth that helped me through role play scenarios, strategic planning, just preparation in regards to I think of like frequently asked questions almost in the capacity of how do you prepare for every potential obstacle that you could walk into. And so preparation becomes a huge part of it. But I think that for me, I'm kind of blessed. I've had some training in negotiation, and I've also had this element of a tremendous amount of failure that's taught me a lot of lessons along the way. Don't do this anymore. These are the things not to do.
Yeah, I've long thought, not only in negotiations but life in general, that I mean, some of it, the most valuable lessons that you can have, or I'm not even going to say valuable, some of the most impactful, the ones that actually cause you to wake up the next day and say, man, I never want that to happen again, right? That's the failure.
Yep. Yep.
So some of the biggest things that we accomplish happened because we failed so hard that we're like, whatever happens, dude, I don't want to feel that way again, right?
Yep. Yep. Yeah. It reminds me of, I'm a big Michael Jordan fan. So
Yeah.
I'm aging myself, but I'm a huge Michael Jordan fan. I know most people still can relate to Jordan, but he's got that quote about, missing 9,000 shots. He says, everyone remembers all the great shots I made. What they don't remember is 26 times I was given the ball to make the game winning shot and I missed. And because of that, I've failed so much that I've learned how to win. And so it's kind of like, you think about that. It's like, wow, I didn't realize 26 times. I only remember like the 15 that he was given the ball and won. I don't remember the 26 that he was given the ball and missed the shot and didn't win. So there's an element to it that it's like the repetition part comes in, but that's also where I go back to saying, the guy was also known for being, maniacal around when he had a bad game. They said it wasn't uncommon for him to be in the gymnasium till 2 o'clock in the morning shooting free throws because he knew that he had a terrible night shooting free throws. So it's like, that's that, that constant training and tenacity that he had to make sure he got better and better and better, so that once he got in the environment that he wanted to be in, that he could perform at the level he needed to.
Yeah, there was another pretty good basketball player who's known to do that, a guy by the name of Kobe. I mean, he was another one known to be there hours before and hours after. I mean, just absolutely refusing to lose. And you touch on a really important component to negotiations, which is the preparation. A lot of people believe, and I want to hear if you agree with this or not, that that the negotiation really begins at the very first phone call, the very first email, because you're laying the foundation for that relationship. How do you feel about that?
Totally agree. I will say the one win that I was most successful with is my wife, that we've now been married for almost 30 years now. And I tell this story sometimes, and I'll tell it. Everyone will get a chuckle out of it. But my wife and I had her best friend and my best friend were brother and sister, and we have known each other for a while, like years, but had never dated or anything. And I always thought she's out of my league. And so we ended up playing cards at their house one evening. When we got ready to leave, we were walking out, and I said, "Hey, would you like to go on a date sometime?" And she looked back and said, "Sure." And I was caught off guard because I was just ready for no. Are you crazy? And so she said, "Sure." Well, I said, "Okay, well, when are you thinking?" And she said, "Tomorrow night." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, now I'm really on the spot." So I said, "Sure." You mean I pick you up at like 7? And she said, "Sure." So when we left, I called her friend Bridget and I said, "Hey, you got to tell me where she likes to eat." And she told me this place, and it was kind of a dive place that I knew about, but I was like, "Oh no, Bridget, you're setting me up." She said, "No, I'm not kidding. It's her favorite place." And so I took her to that place, and later on, naturally a couple of weeks later, told her the story about how I knew about the place. Because when I first asked her, "Where would you like to go eat?" She said, "I don't care, wherever you want." I'm like, "No, really, I'm taking you where." She's "No, really, you, typical stuff you go back and forth with." And I said,
"Yeah,
would you like to go here?" And she goes, "Sure." And so later on, I told her the story. But I think the important thing of what you're bringing up there, the reason I bring this up is because it started at the very beginning of the relationship. And really what happened was, I've shared this with people in the past that said, "Well, but wasn't that kind of manipulative?" And I said, "No, it was actually intentional and extremely caring." I was the guy of the guys she had dated that put in the work to figure out where she wanted to go eat. Because I could have just picked her up, taken her to a nice steakhouse, or done whatever, the other guys had done. But I put forth the effort to figure out because I cared more. So I did more work to make sure. And she recognized it. Even when I told her that story, she thought, that's kind of cute. 2 weeks later, that's kind of cute. So it's like, but to your point, it's the very beginning of that relationship that you start. And it's really like what Stephen Covey would talk about, building trust, character, and competence. Is your heart right? And are you competent to do, what you need to do? And it's that combination of that starts building trust. And those little things over time, taught her that my heart was right, but I was also competent enough as a player, so to speak, of doing the right thing to figure out where to take her. And so anyway.
Well, two things about that. First off, congratulations. Did you say 30 years? Did I hear you right?
Next year will be 30. March will be 30 years.
Wow. So congrats.
30 years later, here we are.
Oh gosh. Well, congratulations on that. Secondly, sir, I'm quite convinced that us men, we always get way more than we deserve, right? I mean, if we got what we did, in terms of who we dated and married, they're always better than us.
Yeah.
If we got what we deserve, we'd be in big trouble. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
You did one of the concepts that I love that you talked about was value, right? So you really set the stage perfectly. When we think about negotiations, part of our job is, like you pointed out, do the research, know about the other party. It should be a collaborative experience, right? We'll talk about that in a minute with the, versus movies, but we need to know what the other party values, because it may not be something that we particularly value. So in the example with your wife, you really didn't care what restaurant you went to. It had no value to you, right? You were not to one specific place where, you had everything set up and ready for the date. You didn't care where you went. You were just happy to be with her, right? But you did the research and found out that this particular place has high value to her, right?
Exactly. And it definitely,
and so
it sure wasn't on the high end of the spectrum. I mean, literally, the food that we ate was probably half the cost of a steakhouse if I had taken her to a steakhouse. So it's like, it wasn't where most people would think, okay, and look, she probably got taken. I don't know the details, but I'm sure some guy took her to a steakhouse at some point before.
Right.
It was a lot more expensive, and they thought they did the right thing. And so it really comes back to what you're getting at, which is preparation, collaboration, open, honest, trust building, understanding that value component is critical.
Yeah. And I think I want to highlight that, because that's so important to recognize that we all, if I hold $100 bill in my hand, depending on where I am, either what part of the country or the world even, those are going to have very different values. If I'm holding that dollar bill in a room full of billionaires, or that $100 bill in a room full of billionaires, or in a room full of impoverished people, very different values, right? So in your example, which I love, and then we won't be terrorizing you talking about your wife anymore, but in the example that you brought it up, in the example that you used, it was something very valuable to her. Didn't have much value to you. In fact, it was better for you. It saved you money, right? It was half the cost of the fancy steakhouse. So I love that you said that. I love that we talk about value, because that is such an important component. Making the connection between negotiations and relationships. Have you found that when you are able to establish that relationship, that trust in a business capacity, that people are the other side is more forthcoming with what their wants and needs are, what their must-haves? Have you experienced that?
Absolutely. Trust just leads to transparency, and transparency leads to, we've got as an example, we've got a recent client that we brought on that in the meeting that we have a new chairperson of our board at Live Earth, the company that I'm with. And when I took her out to meet this client, the client said, she said, well, we appreciate your, naturally doing appreciate your business and all that. And she said, look, we actually made sure that what we did, we were contributing right to you guys and investing properly, because we want to give your team what they need to perform, because we know what it's going to take in this environment to do some of that. So this was a client that in a negotiation, she was more interested in understanding what goes into the process and what's needed, so that she could help internally identify the value of what they would get from it, but also identify, okay, what's a win for us as well. And so that transparency, just the more I really relate a lot of, like, I know people say in sales it's all about relationships, and I think it's kind of loosely used. It's like, okay, it's all about just know a bunch of people. It's not about just knowing a bunch of people. It's about building a relationship of trust and transparency through a process that someone's facilitating a buying process themselves. They've got an issue they're trying to solve. Who knows the pressure that they're faced with getting that solved? It could be really significant. and they're needing someone that they can truly trust to help them solve that issue. And that's where that degree of collaboration and communication and transparency comes into building trust and ultimately to leading to value that makes the whole negotiation process a lot more fluid, a lot more transparent.
You're right. It does build on itself because the more transparency that you have, the more you can get closer to another super important part of it, which is giving the other party their victory speech, right? I mean, it is possible. It is possible, and it does happen that if everything that you want from me happens to be of low value to me, and everything that I want from you happens to be of low value to you, in theory, it's possible that we could negotiate and both be extremely happy because I want everything that you have and you want everything that I have, and neither of us care about what we have, right?
That's right.
But in order to get to the point of me knowing how you value something, I have to have your trust.
That's right.
Right. I have to have earned that so that you're comfortable telling me so that I can give you your victory speech so that you can go back to, if it's an acquisition, you can go back to your family, or if it's corporate, to your boss and say, look at how great I did. Look at what I've got for us. But I don't know what your victory speech looks like. In fact, I've heard of that before. Have you used that question before, asking the other party, hey, look, what's going to make you look good here?
Yeah, there's an element of it, like most of my methodology around sales and what I call facilitating the buying process is around understanding clients are usually in a current state that's not satisfactory. They're trying to get somewhere else. If they are satisfactory, they don't really need us. But if they're trying to solve issues, they got some kind of either problem they're trying to solve or desired outcome they're trying to achieve. They're in a current state and they're going somewhere else. They have this desired outcome they're trying to achieve, that revenue growth, whatever it is. They've got something they're trying to achieve. I think that what we tend to spend a lot of time on is first, let's understand where you are today. What's got you here? What's the situation? And then focus heavily on the outcome. Like, what are you trying to accomplish? When you do, what does that look like? What does success look like? And it's almost like paint that picture, that really good visual picture of, oh, okay, so when this happens, this is what happens. Okay, so if this happens, this is what happens. The more we can paint that picture, by the time we get back to that middle ground of the solution, we've got such a great picture painted that they understand. Most people, I'll reference Stephen Covey again because, in the 7 Habits, he talks about, I think it's habit 5, seek first to understand, then to be understood. Most people want to be understood. And so, but what happens in sales oftentimes is people spend so much time selling that someone doesn't feel understood because I'm so one, not comfortable talking about money and negotiating. So I lean more on my product and service. And I haven't really got really good at diagnosing what the issues are, like understanding where they are and where they're going, so that I can really come back, and when I feel that gap, I feel it really solid. Because now I know, okay, here's exactly where they are today, and here's where, here's the challenges that they face because this is where they are. Here's where they're going. When we can stay, to your point, when you can stay focused on, I always say vision sales, when you can stay focused on the vision of what is to be, and you can paint that art of the possible, whatever anyone wants to call it, and really focus on that, then it allows us to get to a place where people can start visualizing it in their mind. And at some point, like in one of my past businesses, a friend of mine and I started up a marketing agency, and people did realize an hour and a half into a meeting, look, I just trust you guys. Come in and tell us what to do, because we got so close to understanding, their situation where they are and then where they were going. As we started painting that picture clearer and clearer, they finally were just like, what does it take to get you guys involved? And it's because of that ability to focus so heavily and allow them to see that picture. Most people are so their paradigm is so focused on where they are today, it's really hard to see where they're going, even though they know where they want to go. And someone somewhere along the way said, this is our goal, this is a new initiative, we're going to go do X. It's people they hear it and then they go, okay, let's go find vendors to help us do it, but they don't really visualize it that well. And they don't think through the process. Or if they do, they hire a consulting company, come in and write an RFP or something like that. And it's like, okay, that's still not the same thing. It's like, this is not a vetting process for a vendor. It's how close can you get that picture of the future to a point that you feel really, really solid about it. And whoever helps you get that close, you usually feel really, really solid about their ability to help you get there because they can see it as clearly as you can.
Yeah. And the connection that you just made there, which is a perfect one, is we all know the feeling when we have a lot of complicated ideas in our head, a lot of complicated goals, things that we want to do, whatever it is. And then you run across somebody who shows you that they understand not only what you're saying now, but they know the vision of where that needs to go. Yeah, I know even in myself, we'll go back to the lawnmower analogy. I bought a lawnmower last year and it's like, I kind of want something that does this. And I went to Lowe's and the guy says, oh yeah. So if I'm hearing you right, what you want to do is this so that you can do X, Y, and Z. I go, yes, that's exactly right. So in the world of negotiations too, equally as effective, because if you can talk with the other party and show them that you not only know their plight, you know what's valuable to them, but that you want to try to participate in some version of this, helping them in their big picture, Jim, to your point, I think that's exactly what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you nailed it on the head. One of our other guests that we had on last week, she's really influential in the world of sales on LinkedIn is Sam McKenna. And one of her taglines is, show me that you know me, right? Like, don't just blast me with an email talking about how great your services are. Get to know me. She uses a lot of analogy between dating. So that's, you and I talked about that. And like you don't just hop into the first date and say, hey, ready to get married?
That's right. That's right. And it's so even in you buying the lawnmower, if you think about what he did was he just repeated back to you what he thought he understood and maybe a little bit different framework, but that's his word. So he's trying to say, okay, I think this means this to me. It's almost like what I think we heard you say was,
yep.
What did we miss? And it's like, when you can say it succinct, in a lot of cases, even when you end with that, what did we miss? Well, yes, but, and they clarify. It's like, oh, okay, so this, and it's like the ability to go through that process builds trust because it's not just like you say something, the guy goes, yep. Okay, I got a mower. Come over here. It's like if you'd done that, you'd been like, okay, help me understand how this connects the dots of what I just shared with you. And but him just taking a few extra seconds. Most people think that it elongates a process, and it doesn't. It actually shortens a process. If you think about corporate America, we could go through pipelines across the United States sales organizations, and naturally, we all know it too. There's not any of us in sales that don't realize that these pipelines, in a lot of cases, are inflated with opportunities that are hanging on hope because we've rushed the process. We haven't built relationship, and we haven't gone through a process of building that trust and transparency to take just short moments of time, just like that guy did at Home Depot with you or Lowe's, wherever it was with you, and just merely asked you the question back. I think what you're saying is this. And the minute he goes through that, you go, you nailed it. Now you feel really confident about where he walks you next. Because at least he knows he's got an idea in his mind. You don't think he's doing that. It's going to walk you in the wrong direction. You think he's going to walk you in the right direction. If he took you to, weed eaters at that point, you'd be like, did that guy even hear what I said? But if he took you right to the mower, now you realize, okay, this guy has something in mind with this. And oh, by the way, he's much more expert at it than me because he sells these things all the time. So he knows a lot of the difference. He gets all these manufacturers coming in talking about their products. So I'm saying these things that resonates with him. So he's taking me somewhere.
It's amazing how even to the trained person who knows this intellectually, right? How we're still, you and me, we're still emotionally responsive to that. Jim, you train people on how to ask that question or some version of it, right? Am I understanding this correctly? You know what the purpose of this is, which is to be empathetic and genuine and all that. But even when somebody says it to you, it still makes you feel that way. You go, yeah, actually, I feel better now, right?
Yep.
And to talk about the elongating the process, I love this analogy. I don't know if you happen to watch football or not. I used to more. I don't do it too much anymore. But there's actually, are you from the Dallas area too, Jim?
I am.
Okay, so there's an NFL referee Ed Hockley's. Do
Yep.
you know of him?
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Cut
So
guy.
I
I want to be built like that guy, by the way.
yeah. Well, I don't. A lot of people don't know. So he's a extraordinarily successful attorney. I think he owns like 40 offices all over the Dallas area, or maybe it's Houston, one of the Texas towns. But in any event, Ed Hockley's has a reputation for being able to explain a play better than almost any other NFL referee. And when they ran some AI protocol or whatever, and what they ended up finding out is that on average, Ed Hockley's says 2.3 words more than the other person. But 2.3 words more has given an entire nation of football followers the impression that he's this world-class communicator and how he really says it differently, but he's not only saying a little bit more. And I think in that world, Jim, sometimes you can say a whole bunch more just by asking one or two additional questions.
Absolutely. It's a great analogy. It's a great analogy.
I'm mostly just jealous of him at, 70 years old, looking like he does.
He is built. I'd like to be built. I'm 51. I'd love to be built like that guy right now, for sure.
Oh yeah, he's an animal. So we're talking a lot about. You even used the term at one point. You had talked about painting and stuff, and so I want to talk about negotiations as both an art and a science. I talk with folks sometimes who feel very heavy on the science or the data analytics side of it, really processing through that. Some of that involves AI. And then other folks are much heavier on it being an art form, and some are down the middle. So I want to hear your thoughts on that, because also, the product that you guys have has a very strong AI component. So I'm interested to hear your perspective.
Yeah, it's a good question, Matt. I think I actually believe it's right in the middle. And because I think there's this element, no matter what we want to call it, I think about sales in that aspect of it's kind of like when you start building a business or you get into a sales role. There's this a lot of people spend so much time on the quality of their outreach, which is great, but there's also a quantity element of that. You can't say I'm going to spend all day thinking about contacting Matt, and now I contact him at the end of the day, and it's like, oh, Matt's on vacation for a week. Okay, you just spent your entire day when you could have contacted him. So there's this element of starting as a salesperson that you got to mix the quality and quantity aspect. I think it's really similar in negotiation with art and science. There's an element of emotionally you have to get connected. Some of that's art, because you got to be able to communicate effectively. You got to be able to read people. You have to be able to just be a person. Remember that this is a person that you're dealing with while you're going, and in many cases, multiple people. We don't do a tremendous amount in government sales, but we do some. And in government sales, it's totally different. I mean, we deal with clients like Verizon and Citibank that aren't as sophisticated as small, and I don't mean small, but Los Angeles Police Department's another client. Going through a governmental sale there's so many people involved that have to get the blessing. You have to go through that. You have to build relationship with those people. Some of that's an art. And then the scientific element of it is, hey, there's gotta be a process here. We gotta be leaning forward towards, it's kind of like you said, painting that vision. And as you get there, you gotta be learning through the process. Are we checking the boxes along the way? Is there, there's a method to the madness. So there's a logistical element of, you need to complete these things to get through that process, along with the fact that, hey, it can be a little bit ugly in the fact that building relationships sometimes aren't super pretty. Sometimes you have to get to know each other and you realize, this person and I aren't very, very similar. Well, then you have to figure out, okay, is that a deal breaker, or is there something? I even think back to like my wife now, the place she chose to go eat, I would never eat the first time.
Right.
We went back.
I was going to use that. Yeah.
We went back to it 3 or 4 more times. And finally, at some point where a relationship gets close enough that she mentions that she asked me something about it. I said, yeah, it's all right. And so she's like, oh, you don't really like it. And I said, oh, I like it. I like it because I get to go spend time with you. But
sure,
asking me if I'd ever go eat there on my own, I wouldn't. Well, look, she likes that. She likes Chinese food. I'm not a big Chinese food eater. She and I love Mexican food, but there's also some food that I like. I love Italian food. She's not as big on Italian food. So at some point it's like, okay, is that a deal breaker? No, it's not a deal breaker. It's learning. So some of that's a little bit, it can be more fluid as you're building trust through that process. But there's also that element of I've got to check the boxes along the way. If I came out on the first date and said, "Look, I don't really like that kind of food, and I don't like Chinese food. I don't like chick flicks, and I don't like, it's like, okay, wait a second. At some point, you're going to pull yourself completely out of the opportunity. So, and make sure that you don't want to be a part of the opportunity before you start ruling yourself out, because if you do that, you could actually hinder the opportunity and jeopardize the opportunity itself. So, anyway, I'm rambling a bit, but I think you get what I'm saying. Is I really think that it's right in the middle. It's like that. It's the art and the science component of negotiating that's important.
Yeah, no, that what you were saying was exactly what I was thinking, and you brought it to light perfectly, which is, yeah, that art piece is so incredibly important because, listen, you weren't going to get, to go back to your analogy, you weren't going to get that date with your now wife through analytics, right? That wasn't going to happen that way. You weren't going to, throw a stat sheet up about why Jim Barker is like the best dude, right? Like, like that wasn't going to happen. And so you had to do an art form with it. And by the way, going back to what we talked about, getting comfortable, being uncomfortable, and ask that question. So I see it completely related.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to talk about one final thing before we wrap it up and chat also about what's going on over at Live Earth. But the differences, Jim, between the movies portray negotiations to be highly emotional, filled with like pounding fists on tables and one side manipulating and, conniving. Has that generally been your experience when you've seen it, or have they tend to been pretty emotionless?
Yeah, great question. I will say I'll answer that in a couple of different ways.
Please do.
The times where I've had my greatest wins and greatest experiences, and by that I mean clients that reap the greatest rewards, and we felt good about it, and they felt good about it. It was really a win-win relationship, and it never had to do with any manipulation or fist pounding or any of that. It really had everything to do with how do we align. It goes back to, I'm going to overdo this, and at some point you're going to say, "Hey, keep this business," but it goes back to my relationship with my wife.
It's a perfect analogy.
In 30 years, my wife and I have had disagreements. I can promise you, in the first 3 months of our relationship, we didn't, and it was because it was really focused on kind of a win-win. We were both pretty, kind of intrigued with one another, started dating. Hey, seems kind of cool. Well, you're not going to go and, there wasn't manipulation involved, because I wasn't trying to manipulate her into going to a place I wanted to eat or going doing things I wanted to do or whatever. It was kind of like I was trying to do everything she wanted to do, and she's trying to do everything I wanted to do. And it just created a win-win, to the point now we do a lot of what each other wants to do because we get along real well. We know each other, and we've lived together for 30 years and all that. And so I think that, so to answer that question, the win-win relationships for me have really been about no manipulation, no fist pumping or pounding your fist on the table or any of that. It's been a lot more about very collaborative process of understanding one another and what's a win for each other. I think what's interesting is, and there's a guy, Mahan Khalsa, wrote this book called "Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play," and he had some key beliefs in this book, and one of his key beliefs was that clients and consultants want the same thing. He uses consultants as salespeople. Clients and consultants want the same thing. They really want a win-win. If you think about it, I use the analogy of the client I was just referring to a few minutes ago, meeting the new chairperson of our board. And when she told her that, she was meaning, hey, look, I don't want to underpay for what it is that we're getting, because I know it doesn't do me any good to underpay you guys, because I probably get less than what I really need because I'm pulling back on cost. And so so to go back to your question, it's those win-win relationships that's really less about that. The times that there's been any manipulation, a lot of this was early in my career, where I thought it was like, okay, I'm going to get one over. I got to do this. I got to do that. Ooh, he or she's tricking me. I got to figure out my angle. I need to do this. I need to do that. It was, I probably had a lot more heartburn. And probably the relationships, although there's probably a handful of those that turned out to be really great relationships, they weren't near as strong as a whole. the ones that have been really more focused around win-win, what does that look like? And just, it goes back to negotiation. At some point, there to create value, there's got to be something in it for them, but there's also got to be something in it for us. And if there's not something in it for us, it's really not a win-win. And it's really win-lose or lose-win. Either one is not good for either party. Even if they get more than they pay for, it usually doesn't create a lot of extra value over time. It's not because our team's jumping up and down to do more and more and more work for them because they underpaid us to begin with. And so that's where I would say, at least in my experience, it's been less about, pounding fists on the table and manipulation and all that, and much more about trust building, transparency, and remembering these are people. We're doing business with people. Everyone has their own, these are unique individuals that we're working with. And as we learn more about people, we learn more about, what drives them, what a win looks like for them. And we can map our win to their win. And if it overlaps, awesome.
I think people a lot of times in negotiations, they forget about that, or they don't know that's a very achievable outcome for both people to walk away feeling good about it. Because I think that there's that old saying, which doesn't have much validity, which is nobody walks away from a negotiation happy, right? But like, that's actually just not true. I mean, sometimes you don't, and you need to give things that maybe are a little outside your comfort zone. But generally speaking, if both parties are doing it correctly, you can both walk away with what you had wanted. And I'll say one more thing, Jim, before I ask you more about Live Earth. But I'm hearing this reverberate a lot through the last few years, everywhere in business, negotiation, sales. It's amazing how, as we're starting to have more integrity, we're starting to have more authenticity, that we're still seeing the same results. So to your point, with what you're talking about, people value not being manipulated.
That's right.
People value integrity. And I think that started to be rewarded in everywhere in business and sales and negotiation. Have you seen that as well? I mean, just being a good person generally and being honest and transparent is really getting a lot farther.
Yeah, absolutely. And it even goes back to what it helps with that, Matt, is if you think about you buying a mower, even when there's something that may go wrong with a mower, well, you've got a relationship there with someone that you at least have some trust in, that you're going to go back and most likely ask for that guy. And in a lot of cases, you'll remember the guy's name. You'll go back.
That's right.
Hey, can I talk to John? That he sold me this mower. I'm having some issues with it. You have some trust built there with John, so that it's not just like you're blasting, the retailer. You're saying their help doesn't know what they're doing. You're not doing those things. You've got some degree of trust there.
Nope.
that gives them a chance to save an issue that actually may be their own issue or the manufacturer's issue, but they can actually save it because of the trust that they built early on in the process.
Imagine that honesty and integrity yields better results. How about that, right? What an incredibly novel concept. So, Jim, you're talking about Live Earth, where you're the CRO. I want to hear more about what your team does and kind of, what their go-to-market strategy is, what unique propositions they have. I want to hear you brag. So tell us about you and Live Earth and all of the reasons that the listeners here should be coming to get in touch and check out your website.
Awesome, Matt. Appreciate that. Yeah. So we have a Live Earth. We have a software as a service data platform, and really what it's built for is to help organizations. So we're business to business. So it's usually mid-market enterprise clients that are customers of ours, that they leverage our platform to make better, faster business decisions. And I know that's just a vague statement. And so how they do that, we've got within our data platform, we have a tremendous amount. I'm talking about over 100 different data feeds of live streaming data, things like weather, things like traffic, things like parking information, crime information, economic data, all different types of data like that are live streaming into our platform. And so when these companies come to us, they're normally looking at, most of these companies, especially if you think about like a large retail organization, they got a tremendous amount of their own data that they're analyzing consistently to try to make good business decisions. In most cases, what they're missing is this outside data. So they come to us because we've got a platform that already has that data available, that literally they subscribe to it. We turn on a license and now they have access to all of this. So if you think about, like I mentioned earlier, Verizon as a client of ours. Verizon, we have a great relationship with those folks. They got 7,000 stores around the United States. What they want to know is any events that might take place around those stores that could impact employee safety, customer safety, performance, things like that, risk factors, all of those things. So when they came to us, they said, hey, we've been told that you guys could help us with this. We have these little blips in performance around our stores around the country. We don't know what's causing it. But then when we go back and start doing some research, 60 days later, we figure out that something happened. They had to close the store for whatever reason. So today, when a fire pops up somewhere in California that's within a proximity of one of their locations, they get an immediate alert from us that says, hey, fire popped up close to store number 4444, 3.2 miles away. They then go into action on, either shut down the store if they need to, communicate to the staff for safety purposes, communicating to their customer base in that area. We're in digital support only, all those types of things. And so it's that third-party data with those actionable insights within our platform that tell them those types of things. And that can apply. That's just one scenario, but just imagine that applying, in an environment around safety and all of that. There's also this big play in the economic space where people are looking at performance around, how competitors. So if we talked about Lowe's and Home Depot, those guys wanting to know what each other's doing in those stores. What's the performance, foot traffic, spend, that type of data. That's the kind of data that we provide through our platform.
Very interesting. So the other thing too, I don't think we talked about. I'm actually a retired police officer, and so you had mentioned LAPD is also one of your clients,
Yep.
correct?
Yep, we work with a lot of police departments around the country. So you'll appreciate this. That's right. I remember seeing your LinkedIn profile. You were a police officer before. So,
Yeah.
hey, thanks for your service. I'm always appreciative of people in the military or police officers, just for the mere sake that I haven't been that person, but I enjoy the luxury of you guys being that. So thank you for that. So the police department.
It was my honor and privilege. It was my honor and privilege.
Yep, absolutely. So the police departments that we work with, what they do, and you can relate to this, they have all these systems. They have video systems. They have computer aided dispatch. They have all these different license plate readers, all these different platforms that provide them a lot of data. So what they struggle with is how do you, something happens, what platform do you jump into to see what's happening? So what they use our platform for is to bring all of those data points into our platform and then have one single pane of glass on all of that with one rule set around it. So we can pick up on things in addition to the feeds of data that they're bringing in. We've got things like social sentiment. So we can pick up on early stages of like protests or unplanned events that may be happening that give them notification on, okay, there's things going on around here. Since we work with a lot of the telecom companies, we can pick up on congestion in an area. We work with traffic, so we can say things with traffic. So really, it's more of like a situational awareness type application in those environments that they're leveraging Live Earth for.
Amazing. I mean, so to put this into, and we're almost done here to wrap up, but to put this into simplistic terms, and please correct me if I'm oversimplifying this, but what I'm hearing is for your individual client, this is like a personalized version of Google in a way, right? Like whereas all the information that's kind of out there in the ethos, if I want to know it specifically about me and my business, everything that could be impacting me or relevant to me, this is what I'm getting from you guys. Is that right? Am I close?
Absolutely. It's really largely based on time and location. So and since we synchronize the data, a lot of like it being a former police officer, you'll know like the ability to go back and watch game film. You can rewind and see an event as it happens. And as it happens, you can, go through the process of coaching on, okay, we learned something from this. Next time these types of things happen, here's what we need to do better. You nailed it.
Truly fascinating. I mean, really, like, again, as a former law enforcement officer, even just business, like, I see this as super valuable. So, the name of the company, everybody, is called Live Earth. And I'm on the website right now. Really easy to use, really user friendly. Liveearth.com. Two E's, LIVEERTH.com. So, Jim, do you have anything, any final words you want to add before we wrap up here?
No, thanks for having me, Matt. It's been an honor to be on the show, and it's cool getting to visit with you and sharing stories. And even if some of those went a little bit too personal, it was a lot of fun.
The stories were exactly what we want on here. We trust me, we've had we've had plenty of personal, so it was an absolute pleasure to have you as well, sir. And I thank you so much for your time.